Arthur Pendelton did not live in the world, he lived above it. From the 68th floor of the Pendelton Global Tower, the city of Chicago looked like a circuit board, neat, logical, and entirely under his control. The cars were mere pulses of light moving through glass arteries, and the people were invisible, reduced to data points that fueled the complex algorithms of his financial empire. Arthur leaned his forehead against the triple-paned, reinforced glass of his office. The glass was cold, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled 72 degrees Fahrenheit of his sanctuary, scented faintly of sandalwood and expensive ink. At 45, Arthur was the sovereign of sense. He had revolutionized banking by integrating high-level AI into every transaction. His proudest achievement was the CP1, Compassion Protocol 1, a suite of algorithms designed to analyze a person's holistic reliability rather than just a credit score. It was supposed to be the heart of the machine. Vesper, Arthur said, his voice echoing in the minimalist room. Yes, Mr. Pendelton. A smooth, synthetic voice replied from the hidden speakers. Read me the impact report for the CP1 launch in the Midwest sector. Processing, Vesper chimed. The Compassion Protocol has increased loan approval efficiency by 42%. It has successfully filtered out high-risk variables while maintaining a 98% retention rate for Tier 1 clients. Global feedback suggests the system is impeccable in its logic. Arthur frowned. Impeccable logic. That's what we wanted, wasn't it? He walked toward his desk, a single, massive slab of petrified wood that cost more than a suburban home. On it sat a digital tablet displaying the morning's headlines. One caught his eye, "The Ghost in the Machine, Why Modern Banking Has Forgotten the Human Face." The article was a scathing critique of Pendelton Trust. It argued that while the bank was efficient, it had become a gilded fortress where the poor were not just rejected, but erased by algorithms that couldn't understand the nuances of a bad day, a lost wallet, or a desperate moment. Vesper, do I know what a bad day feels like? According to your biometric data, Mr. Pendelton, your stress levels have not exceeded the 15th percentile in 3 years. You have optimized your life for maximum equilibrium. Arthur stared at his hands. They were soft. They hadn't held a coin in months. He lived in a world of biometric scans and concierge services. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of existential nausea. He was the architect of a world he didn't inhabit. He was a god who had forgotten the smell of the earth. Cancel my lunch with the Secretary of the Treasury, Arthur said suddenly. His heart began to beat faster, a rare 16th percentile event. Reason for cancellation? Vesper asked. Technical difficulties, Arthur muttered. I need to perform a stress test. He walked into his private dressing room. Usually, this room was a temple to bespoke tailoring, rows of charcoal, navy, and midnight black suits, each hand-stitched in London. But tucked in the very back, in a box marked charity/donation, was a relic from a different life, a faded gray hoodie from his university days, a pair of jeans with a frayed hem, and sneakers that had lost their luster. He stripped off the $5 suit. He felt the cool air on his skin before pulling on the rougher fabric of the old clothes. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize himself. Without the sharp lines of the suit, his shoulders seemed less imposing. With his hair mussed and the shadow of a morning beard, he looked ordinary. He looked like a man who struggled. He reached for his phone, the titanium-cased device that held the keys to his empire. He paused. No, he whispered. If I have the phone, I have the world. He laid the phone on the petrified wood desk. Beside it, he placed his wallet, heavy with black cards and IDs. He took nothing but a single $5 bill he found in the pocket of the old jeans. Arthur Pendelton exited his office via the service elevator, bypassing the grand lobby where the security guards would have recognized his gait even in rags. He stepped out of the back alley and into the humid, chaotic heat of the city. The sensory assault was immediate. The roar of a passing bus, the smell of burnt coffee and hot asphalt, the jostling of elbows. For the first time in a decade, people didn't move out of his way. A businessman in a suit, a man who probably worked for Arthur, nearly knocked him over while shouting into a headset. "Watch it, buddy." The man barked without even looking at Arthur's face. Arthur stood still, a ghost in his own city. He felt a strange, intoxicating thrill. He was invisible. He was a zero. He began to walk toward the downtown branch of Pendelton Trust and Global. It was the flagship branch, a cathedral of finance. He wanted to see if his compassion protocol would recognize its creator if he came to it as a beggar. As he walked, he felt the $5 bill in his pocket. It felt flimsy. He passed a pharmacy and realized he had a genuine headache, the stress of the noise, perhaps. He looked at the prices in the window. A bottle of aspirin and a bottle of water would exceed $5. "I need more," he realized. "I need a safety net." He decided on the goal. He would walk into his bank and ask for a $50 microloan. It was the smallest credit product they offered, specifically designed by Arthur to bridge the gap for the underbanked. As he approached the gleaming glass doors of the bank, he saw his own reflection again. The towering building behind him bore his name in bold, minimalist letters, Pendelton. He looked at the security guard standing by the door. It was Marcus. Arthur knew Marcus's file: former Marine, 2 kids, likes fly fishing. Arthur had approved the bonus structure that gave Marcus a comfortable life. Arthur walked up to the door. Marcus looked at him. Not at him, but through him. Marcus saw a man in a faded hoodie who looked like he might be looking for a place to sit and avoid the sun. "The ATM is around the corner, sir," Marcus said, his voice polite but firm, his hand resting near his belt. The compassion protocol started at the door. Guards were trained to be polite but to keep non-transacting individuals moving. "I'm not here for the ATM," Arthur said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to speak to a loan officer." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He looked at Arthur's scuffed sneakers. "A loan officer? For a personal account?" "Yes. A microloan. $50. Marcus sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had seen this 1,000 times, the desperate and the deluded. "Head to kiosk 4. Clara will help you if she's free." Arthur stepped into the cool, pressurized air of the bank. The marble floors muffled his footsteps. He felt a surge of pride looking at the design until he realized that in these clothes, the beauty of the bank felt like a barrier. The high ceilings didn't feel aspirational anymore, they felt like they were designed to make him feel small. He approached kiosk 4. Clara, a woman in her late 20s with tired eyes and a perfectly pressed blouse, was typing furiously. Arthur cleared his throat. "Hello. My name is Artie. And I'd like to apply for a $50 bridge loan." Clara didn't look up. "ID and Pendelton account number." I don't have them on me. I've had a very difficult morning. But I am a long-time associate of this institution." Now, Clara looked up. She didn't see the man who signed her paychecks. She saw a man who looked like a liability. "Sir," she said, her voice echoing the compassion protocol training, perfectly neutral, perfectly cold. "Without an ID, the system cannot even open the application window. RAI, CP1, requires a biometric or alphanumeric anchor. Can't you make an exception?" Arthur asked, his voice dropping. "It's $50. I just need to get through the day. Look at me. I'm a person. Not an anchor." Clara's fingers paused over the keyboard. For a second, Arthur saw a flicker of empathy in her eyes. But then she looked at the computer screen, where a small prompt reminded her of her efficiency rating. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time, Arthur realized that "I'm sorry" was the most dangerous phrase in his bank. It was the phrase that signaled the end of humanity and the beginning of the algorithm. The system says no. Arthur Pendelton, the man worth $80 billion, leaned against the cold marble of his own counter and felt the first shiver of true fear. He had built a cage so perfect that even he couldn't get out. Arthur Pendelton sat on a chair that he had personally selected for this branch. It was an ergonomic masterpiece, upholstered in vegan leather that was supposed to feel inviting yet professional. But as he sat there in his thrift store hoodie, the chair felt slick and cold, like it was trying to slide him off its surface and back onto the street where he supposedly belonged. Across from him, Clara's eyes were fixed on a dual monitor setup. On the left screen was a complex web of data, the Pendelton Trust internal dashboard. On the right was a blank white space waiting for an identity to be verified. Artie, was it? Clara asked. She didn't look at him. Her fingers were poised over the mechanical keyboard, which clicked with a rhythmic, military precision. Yes. Artie, Arthur said. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished mahogany desk. Look, I know how this works. You have a discretionary fund for microloans. It's part of the community outreach initiative. I just need $50. My car was towed, everything was in it. My phone, my wallet, my life. I just need enough for a cab and some basic supplies until I can get to my office. Clara finally looked up. Her eyes weren't unkind, but they were framed by the dark circles of someone who spent 10 hours a day staring at blue light. Mr. Artie, I hear that story 3 times a day. Usually, it's a towed car. Sometimes it's a stolen backpack. Once, a man claimed he was an undercover prince testing my loyalty. Arthur felt a hot prickle of embarrassment. I'm not a prince. I'm just a man asking for the compassion protocol to be applied. Clara paused. Her eyebrows shot up. You know the name of the software? I read about it in the papers, Arthur lied quickly. It's supposed to look at the person, not just the paperwork. That's what the brochures say, right? Banking with a heart. Clara let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like paper tearing. The brochures were written by people who live in penthouses, sir. The software is a different animal. She turned back to her screen. I'll try to run a John Doe profile for a Tier 4 emergency microloan. But I have to warn you, the CP1 system is very thorough. It pulls from public records, social media scrapers, and facial recognition if I turn the desk camera on. Don't turn on the camera, Arthur said sharply. If the facial recognition hit the central server, the game would be over. He wasn't ready for it to be over. He wanted to see how the other half lived. Fine. Manual entry, Clara sighed. Age: 45. Residential status. Arthur hesitated. Transient. For now. Employment: self-employed. Consultant. Clara's fingers danced. As she entered the data, Arthur watched the screen. He saw the processing icon, a golden circle that he had spent 6 months perfecting with his UX design team. It was meant to be calming. To him, it now looked like a whirlpool, sucking his dignity down into the binary depths. Suddenly, a notification popped up in the corner of Clara's screen. It was a small, pulsing red box. Warning: empathy quota reached for branch 102. Arthur stared. What is that? Clara tried to minimize the box, but it stayed pinned to the foreground. It's nothing, she whispered, her voice tight. It says empathy quota, Arthur pressed. I mean, I know how these systems are built. Does that mean you've given out too many loans today? Clara looked around to see if her supervisor was watching. She leaned in, her voice a low hiss. It means the branch has reached its calculated risk threshold for the day. The CP1 is an AI, Artie. It's designed to maximize profit while maintaining a benevolent brand image. It calculates exactly how much compassion we can afford to lose before it impacts the quarterly dividends. We've had 5 approvals today. The sixth has to be a perfect alpha candidate. And you, sir, are not a perfect alpha. Arthur felt a cold stone settle in his stomach. He remembered the meeting in the boardroom 3 years ago. He had sat at the head of the table and told his developers, "We need to ensure the bank's stability. We can't be a charity. Make the AI smart enough to know when to stop being nice." He had called it strategic philanthropy. Sitting here, on the other side of the mahogany, it felt like automated cruelty. "Run the application anyway," Arthur said, his voice regaining some of its natural authority. Clara frowned, confused by the sudden change in his tone. "I told you, it's going to deny it." "Run it?" "I want to see why." Clara shrugged and hit the submit key. For 30 seconds, the room fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant chime of the front doors opening and closing. Arthur watched the screen with a morbid fascination. This was his soul, laid bare in lines of Python and C++. The screen turned a deep, bruised shade of purple. Then, the verdict appeared in a stark, white font. Application denied. Reason code, 99X, unverifiable human asset. Confidence score, 0.02%. Recommendation, terminate interaction. Direct to nearest municipal shelter. The AI, his Vesper logic didn't even see him as a person. He was an unverifiable human asset. A zero. "I'm sorry," Clara said, and this time, the "I'm sorry" felt like a recorded message. She was already looking past him toward the next person in line, a woman in a designer coat carrying a Pomeranian. "The system is final. There is no manual override for Tier 4 denials. It's for security reasons, you understand." "I don't understand," Arthur said, his voice rising. "I'm standing right here. You can see me. You can see I'm not a threat. You can see I'm in need. $50. That's less than the price of the flowers in your lobby." "Sir, please lower your voice," Clara said, her eyes darting toward the security desk where Marcus was already beginning to uncross his arms. "The system was designed to help people like me." Arthur shouted, the irony of his own lie burning in his throat. "It was designed to be better than a cold-hearted banker. But it's worse. It's just a mirror of your own greed, translated into code." Clara's face hardened. The flicker of empathy he had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a defensive wall. "You don't know anything about this bank, Mr. Artie. You think I like saying no? Every no I give lowers my client's satisfaction score. If it drops below 80%, I lose my bonus. If I lose my bonus, I can't pay my own mortgage, which, by the way, is held by Pendelton Trust. We're all in the machine, sir. I just happen to have a desk. You happen to have a hoodie. Now, please. Leave." Arthur felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, terrifying sense of loss. He had built a world where everyone was afraid of everyone else, and the only thing they trusted was a screen that didn't have a heart. He looked at the digital clock on the wall. He had been Artie for exactly 90 minutes. In those 90 minutes, he had lost his identity, his dignity, and his faith in his life's work. "One more thing," Arthur said, his voice cracking. He pointed to the portrait of himself on the far wall, the one where he looked like a titan of industry, chin tilted up, eyes focused on a glorious future. "Do you think he knows? Do you think Arthur Pendelton knows that his bank treats people this way?" Clara glanced at the portrait. "He's a billionaire, Artie. He doesn't think about people. He thinks about numbers. And according to the numbers, you don't exist." The words hit Arthur harder than a physical blow. He stood up, his legs feeling like lead. He didn't say another word. He turned and began to walk toward the exit, but his eyes were blurred. He didn't notice the security guard stepping into his path. He didn't notice the small camera in the ceiling, the one he had personally insisted be high definition, tracking his every movement, tagging him as a potential disruption in the central database. Arthur Pendelton was a stranger in his own house, and the house was starting to show him the door. The rejection was a physical weight, a cold sludge in Arthur's veins. He stood there, Artie the transient, staring at a screen that had just deleted his existence with the clinical efficiency of a gutter sweep. But as the terminate interaction prompt blinked in a rhythmic, taunting red, Arthur's eyes drifted upward. Behind Clara's desk, centered perfectly between two Romanesque pillars, hung a massive oil painting. It was a commissioned piece by Julian Vane, the world's most sought-after portraitist. In the painting, Arthur Pendelton sat in a wingback chair of oxblood leather. He looked regal, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his eyes fixed on a distant, prosperous horizon. He wore a midnight blue pinstripe suit that shimmered with the discreet luster of high-grade silk. The frame was gold-leafed, illuminated by a dedicated spotlight that made the painted Arthur seem to glow with a divine, fiscal light. Arthur looked at the painting. Then he looked at Clara. Then he looked back at the painting. "Do you see that man?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling not with fear, but with the sheer, tectonic pressure of the irony. Clara didn't even look back. She was already resetting her terminal for the next real client. The founder? Of course. Every branch has one. It's supposed to inspire confidence. Now, sir, if you don't mind. No, look at him, Arthur insisted, his hand trembling as he pointed a finger toward the canvas. Look at the eyes. The slight curve of the left eyebrow. The scar just below the jawline from a childhood rowing accident in Oxford. Look at me, Clara. Clara finally paused. She leaned back, crossing her arms. She looked at the man in the faded, salt and pepper hoodie. She saw the stubble, the weary bags under his eyes, the cheap sneakers with a loose thread on the heel. Then she looked up at the god of finance in the gold frame. She didn't gasp. She didn't fall to her knees. She laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which made it worse. It was a laugh of genuine, exhausted amusement. "Oh, Artie. You're the third one this week." Arthur blinked. "The third what?" "The third secret billionaire. Yesterday, we had a guy in a hospital gown claiming he was the Duke of Windsor. On Monday, a woman tried to pay her mortgage with invisible gold she said Arthur Pendelton had personally gifted her in a dream. Sir, I get it. The world is hard. You want to believe you're someone else, someone who doesn't have to worry about $50. But you're not him. You're just, you. I am him." Arthur's voice cracked. "I can tell you the name of the tailor who made that suit. It's Leonard Logsdale. I can tell you that the watch in that painting, the Patek Philippe, is currently sitting in a humidor on the 68th floor because the winding mechanism is slightly fast." At the mention of the watch, a man in a sharp, slate-gray suit stepped out from a side office. This was Mr. Sterling, the branch manager. Sterling was a man who lived for KPIs, hair gel, and the reflected glory of the Pendelton name. He carried a tablet like a shield. "Is there a problem here, Clara?" Sterling asked, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "Just a founder, Mr. Sterling," Clara said, her smirk widening. "Artie here says he's the man on the wall." Sterling turned his gaze toward Arthur. He performed a slow, insulting scan from Arthur's messy hair down to his scuffed toes. Sterling had met the real Arthur Pendelton exactly once at a high-speed corporate retreat where Arthur had spoken for 5 minutes before being whisked away by a helicopter. To Sterling, Arthur Pendelton was not a human being, he was a brand. A logo. A spirit. "Remarkable," Sterling said, stepping closer. He didn't smell like the street, he smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. The resemblance is, well, it's non-existent. My dear fellow, Arthur Pendelton is currently in a closed-door summit with the G7 leaders. He doesn't wear hoodies that smell like the L train. And he certainly doesn't come into a downtown branch begging for the price of a mid-range bottle of wine. It's a stress test, Sterling. Arthur barked, his old authority leaking through. I'm testing the CP1's empathy parameters. And you're failing. You're failing spectacularly. The use of his name made Sterling's eyes flicker with a momentary, sharp annoyance. He's been reading the annual reports, Sterling muttered to Clara. They always learn the jargon. It makes the delusion feel more real to them. He turned back to Arthur, his expression shifting into a mask of fake, professional pity. Listen to me, Artie. This bank is a temple of logic. We deal in hard assets. In data. In verifiable truths. The man in that painting represents the pinnacle of human achievement. You represent a loitering violation. If you truly were Arthur Pendleton, you would know that he has no patience for waste. And right now, you are wasting my branch's time. Look at the painting. Arthur screamed, losing his composure. He lunged toward the desk, grabbing the edge of the marble. Look at the ring on his pinky finger. It's a signet ring. If I had it here, I'd show you the family crest. But you don't have it, do you? Sterling snapped. The mask of politeness finally slipped. You have nothing. You are a ghost. You are a zero-sum entity. Marcus. The security guard, Marcus, moved with the heavy, inevitable grace of a mountain. He stepped between Arthur and the desk, his shadow falling over the billionaire. All right, Artie, Marcus said. His voice was lower, more compassionate than Sterling's, but no less firm. You've had your fun. Let's go before I have to make this official. Marcus, look at me, Arthur pleaded, reaching out to touch the guard's arm. Remember the Christmas ham? The one with the honey glaze? I sent it to your house in Naperville. I know your daughter's name's Sarah and Maya. Marcus froze for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, Arthur saw a spark of recognition, a memory of a man who cared about the details. But then Marcus looked at Arthur's clothes. He looked at the frantic, disheveled state of a man who appeared to be having a mental breakdown. The logic of the system took over. Marcus had been trained by the Pendelton security protocol, anomalous behavior plus lack of credentials equals threat. Everyone knows my kids' names if they look at my Facebook, pal, Marcus said, his voice hardening. That was a cheap shot. Now, move. Now. Marcus grabbed Arthur's upper arm. The grip was like an iron vise. Arthur struggled, not because he wanted to fight, but because the sheer injustice of it felt like a physical fire in his chest. I built this. Arthur yelled as he was dragged toward the revolving doors. I built the marble. I hired the architect. I wrote the code that's telling you I don't exist. The customers in the lobby, the woman with the Pomeranian, the businessman in the charcoal suit, the young couple opening a savings account all stopped and stared. They didn't see a visionary being wronged. They saw a disruption. They saw a man who didn't belong in this clean, quiet, expensive world. Some of them pulled out their phones to record the crazy guy at the bank, their screens reflecting the very algorithms that had already judged Arthur and found him wanting. Sterling stood by Clara's desk, smoothing his tie. Clara, call the maintenance crew. I want that portrait wiped down. I feel like his shouting might have contaminated the air near it. Yes, Mr. Sterling, Clara said, her head already back down, lost in the blue light of the terminal. Arthur felt the humid air of the street hit his face as Marcus shoved him through the doors. He stumbled, his sneakers skidding on the sidewalk. He nearly fell into a trash can. "Don't come back, Artie," Marcus said, standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the golden light of the lobby. "Get some help. Go to the mission on 4th Street. They have people who talk to guys like you." The heavy glass doors swung shut with a soft, pressurized thud. The sound of the city rushed back in the honking horns, the screeching brakes, the indifferent chatter of thousands of people. Arthur Pendelton stood on the sidewalk, his chest heaving. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He looked at the $5 bill he still clutched in his palm, the only thing he had left in the world. He looked up at the skyscraper above him. His name was on the top, glowing against the clouds. But down here, on the pavement, the name didn't belong to him anymore. The name belonged to the building. The name belonged to the AI. The name belonged to a ghost. He was a billionaire who had just been evicted from his own soul. And he realized, with a terrifying clarity, that if he died right here on this sidewalk, the system would simply record it as a statistic in a high-vagrancy zone, while the man in the painting continued to smile, glowing in the dark, forever out of reach. Arthur turned away from the glass and began to walk. He didn't know where he was going, but for the first time in 20 years, he wasn't following a schedule. He was just a man, alone in the rain that was just beginning to fall, carrying a $5 bill and a heart full of fire. The rain began as a fine mist, the kind that didn't so much fall as hang in the air, clinging to the fibers of Arthur's thrift store hoodie until it felt like a cold, wet shroud. He stood on the corner of Wacker Drive, the wind whipping off the Chicago River with a predatory bite. For 20 years, Arthur Pendelton had viewed the city from the climate-controlled silence of a Maybach or the pressurized serenity of a private elevator. Now, the city was loud. It was abrasive. It smelled of wet asphalt, bus exhaust, and the metallic tang of the L train screeching overhead. He looked down at his hand. The $5 bill was damp, the ink of Lincoln's portrait looking as tired as Arthur felt. $5, he whispered. In his other life, $5 didn't exist. It was a rounding error. It was the tip he gave a valet without even looking at the denomination of the bill. Now, it was his entire net worth. He felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in his throat. He had billions in offshore accounts, tens of millions in liquid assets, and real estate holdings that spanned 3 continents. But in the eyes of the world he had meticulously digitized, he was a man who couldn't afford a decent sandwich. He began to walk. He needed a phone. He needed to call his chief of security, Miller, or his executive assistant, Sarah. They would laugh, they would fly a helicopter to whatever rooftop he pointed at, and this stress test would become a legendary anecdote told over 30-year-old scotch. Remember that time Arthur got kicked out of the downtown branch? Classic. But as he approached a public charging station, a sleek, Pendelton-branded kiosk that offered free connectivity for the modern citizen, he realized the flaw in his plan. To use the free phone, he had to log in. To log in, he needed a Pendelton ID or a verified social media account. He touched the screen. Please scan biometric or enter recovery code. He stared at the scanner. If he scanned his thumb, the system would recognize him. But what then? The security protocol he'd implemented for high-profile accounts would immediately trigger a potential kidnapping/coercion alert. Silently, the kiosk would lock down, the nearest police units would be dispatched, and the protocol would treat him as a victim under duress. He would be swarmed by sirens and flashing lights. He wasn't ready for the noise. Not yet. He wanted to see the belly of the beast he had fed for so long. He turned away from the kiosk and kept walking toward the south side, leaving the gleaming towers behind. The architecture began to change. The marble and glass gave way to brick and soot. The compassion protocol ads on the billboards changed too. In the financial district, they promised wealth growth. Here, they promised debt management. He ducked into a small, cramped diner called the Greasy Spoon to escape the intensifying rain. The air inside was thick with the smell of old fry oil and cheap coffee. Coffee's $3. Refills ain't free, a woman behind the counter said without looking up. She was wearing a name tag that read Martha. She had the same weary, translucent skin as Clara back at the bank. Arthur sat on a stool that wobbled. Just coffee, please. He handed over his damp $5 bill. Martha took it, held it up to the light with a suspicious squint as if even a $5 bill from a man in a hoodie was a potential counterfeit, and rang it up. She slid 2 crumpled singles back to him. You look like you've seen a ghost, sugar, Martha said, finally looking at him. Her eyes softened just a fraction. I think I am a ghost, Arthur said, wrapping his cold hands around the thick ceramic mug. I went to the bank today. They told me I didn't exist. Martha snorted, wiping the counter with a gray rag. Welcome to the club. Pendleton Trust. Arthur nodded. How did you know? They're the only ones with that AI nonsense. My brother worked at the docks for 30 years. Had a stroke last winter. He went in to ask for a grace period on his mortgage, something he'd paid on time since 1994. The computer told him that based on his morbidity projection, he was no longer a viable long-term asset. They foreclosed in 60 days. The system don't have heirs, honey. It only has a calculator. Arthur took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, burnt, and the best thing he had tasted in years. The man who started that bank. Arthur Pendleton. People say he's a genius. People say a lot of things, Martha said, leaning on the counter. I say he's a man who forgot that money is just paper. It's people that make the world spin. He built a machine that's supposed to help us, but all it does is harvest us. He's up in that tower of his, probably eating gold-plated steak, while we're down here trying to figure out if we can afford the empathy fee on our checking accounts. The empathy fee? Arthur asked, his heart sinking. What is that? Oh, it's the new thing. If you want to talk to a human teller instead of the kiosk, they charge you $5 a month for premium human interaction. They call it the compassion tier. Can you believe that? Charging for a hello and a how's your mother? Arthur felt a wave of nausea. He remembered that memo. It had been presented to him as a resource allocation strategy. His CFO had said, we are incentivizing digital migration by placing a nominal value on manual processing. It hadn't sounded like charging for a hello. It had sounded like efficiency. Sitting in this diner, listening to the rain hammer against the cracked window, it sounded like a crime against humanity. He finished his coffee and stood up. He had $2 left. Hey, Martha called out as he reached the door. You got a place to stay tonight? The rain's turning to sleet. I have a home, Arthur said. I just have to figure out how to get the door to recognize me. Good luck, Artie, she said. He stepped back out into the cold. The sun was setting, turning the Chicago skyline into a jagged silhouette of purple and black. He began to walk back toward the center of the city, toward the Pendelton Tower. But he didn't go to the front entrance. He went to the park across the street, a park he had donated $10 million to renovate. He sat on a bench dedicated to his late mother. In memory of Eleanor Pendleton, a woman of grace and charity. The irony was complete. He was sitting on a bench he owned, in a park he built, shivering because he couldn't prove he was himself. He saw a man sitting on the next bench over, wrapped in a threadbare wool coat. The man was holding a small, battery-operated radio to his ear. And in local news, the radio announcer's voice crackled through the static. Pendleton Trust stocks reached an all-time high today following the successful rollout of their Global Empathy Initiative. CEO Arthur Pendleton remains unavailable for comment, though sources say he is currently reviewing the system's performance from an undisclosed location. Arthur looked at the man with the radio. He's right here, he whispered. What's that, Mac? The man asked, lowering the radio. Nothing, Arthur said. Just, the undisclosed location is colder than I thought it would be. The man chuckled. Always is, brother. Always is. You want a piece of this? It's half a protein bar. Found it in a bin behind the gym. Still wrapped. The man held out a crushed, chocolate-flavored bar. Arthur Pendleton, the man who had dined with kings and presidents, looked at the half-eaten bar. He looked at the man's calloused, dirty hand. He took the bar. Thank you. I'm Silas, the man said. I'm Arthur. Nice name. Like the king. You got a sword tucked in that hoodie, Arthur? No, Arthur said, taking a bite of the chalky, sweet bar. I think I broke the sword a long time ago. I'm trying to see if I can forge a new one. Well, Silas said, leaning back and closing his eyes as the sleet began to turn the world white. Don't take too long. The system don't like it when you stay out in the rain. It tends to forget you're there. Arthur sat in the dark, the sovereign of sense, eating a discarded protein bar with a stranger. He watched his tower, his monument to logic and data, shining in the distance. He realized that the stress test wasn't over. It had just begun. He didn't want to just go back anymore. He wanted to go back and tear the whole thing down. He needed to get into that building. Not as a billionaire, but as a ghost. He needed to show the system what happens when a zero decides to fight back. The dawn over Chicago was not golden, it was a bruised, industrial gray. Arthur Pendleton woke up on a park bench, his joints screaming with a dull, rhythmic ache he had never known. Sleet had crusted on the sleeves of his thrift store hoodie, turning the fabric into a stiff, frozen armor. Beside him, Silas was already awake, packing a small rucksack with the methodical slowness of a man who had no place to be. You still alive, King Arthur? Silas asked, his breath hitching in the cold air. Arthur sat up, his head spinning. I think so. Though alive feels like a very generous term right now. Silas handed him a small, dented thermos. Drink. It's mostly sugar and lukewarm water, but it'll kickstart your heart. Arthur took a sip. It was terrible, but as the warmth hit his stomach, he felt a spark of the old fire, the one that had built an empire from a single coating basement 20 years ago. He looked at Silas, a man the system had flagged as a zero, yet who was the only person in 24 hours to offer him a loan without asking for collateral. Silas, Arthur said, his voice raspy. I told you I was forging a new sword. I think I'm ready to go back to the forge. Good luck, Mac. Just remember, when you get back to your castle, try not to forget what the ground feels like. It's harder down here, but the air is real. Arthur stood up. He didn't say goodbye, he made a silent vow. He began the 3-mile trek back to the Pendelton Global Tower. He walked with a limp, his sneakers soaked through, looking like every other unverifiable asset the city ignored. When he reached the towering glass monolith of his headquarters, the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, reflecting off the windows in a blinding, merciless glare. He didn't go to the service entrance this time. He walked straight to the main revolving doors, the ones guarded by 2 men in tactical gear. Stop right there, one guard said, stepping forward. Deliveries are in the back. Loitering is prohibited. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He stood tall, the wet hoodie clinging to his frame like a royal robe. Vesper, Arthur said, his voice loud and clear. The guard frowned. What did you say? Arthur ignored him and looked at the sleek, black pillar near the door, a sensor array for the building's AI. Vesper. Override code, Aurelius-09 Alpha. Initiate the maker's hand. The guards froze. For a 3-second eternity, nothing happened. Then, the black pillar pulsed with a deep, Cobalt blue light. A voice, the same smooth, synthetic voice that had spoken to Arthur in his penthouse, echoed through the plaza. Biometric mismatch detected. However, vocal frequency and override code confirmed. Welcome back, Mr. Pendelton. Shall I alert the board of directors? The guard's jaws dropped. The one who had told him to move back reached for his radio, his hand trembling. Wait, you're Pendelton. I was, Arthur said, stepping through the doors as they hissed open. Today, I'm just the guy who's about to delete your job description. The next hour was a whirlwind of motion. Arthur bypassed the lobby, ignoring the gasps of the executive secretaries as he rode the private elevator to the 68th floor. He didn't wait for a suit. He walked into the main server room, the brain of Pendelton Trust, dripping water onto the pristine, anti-static floors. His chief technology officer, a man named Henderson, ran into the room, breathless. Arthur. My God, we thought you were kidnapped. Your phone, your vitals, everything went dark. We were an hour away from calling the FBI. I wasn't kidnapped, Henderson, Arthur said, his eyes fixed on the massive central terminal. I was denied. I was categorized. I was direct to shelter recommended. What are you talking about? The CP1, Arthur said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. The compassion protocol. It works perfectly. It's the most efficient, logical, and heartless thing I've ever seen. It's a masterpiece of cruelty. Arthur, stop. What are you doing? Henderson yelled as a massive progress bar appeared on the wall-sized monitors. Core deletion initiated, Compassion Protocol 1.0. I'm killing the machine, Arthur said. And then, I'm going for a drive. At the downtown branch, Mr. Sterling was having a marvelous morning. A high net worth client was in his office, and the efficiency ratings were at an all-time high. Clara was at kiosk 4, mechanically processing alpha candidates with the speed of a professional gambler. Suddenly, the front doors didn't just open, they were held open. A fleet of 4 black Cadillac Escalades had pulled up onto the sidewalk, their sirens chirping once. A team of security detail in charcoal suits stepped out, forming a corridor. The bank went silent. Customers turned. Sterling ran out of his office, adjusting his tie, a sycophantic smile already plastered on his face. Is it a federal audit? A VIP? A man stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the branch's annual rent, a charcoal silk masterpiece, tailored to perfection. His hair was slicked back, his jaw clean shaven. But as he stepped into the marble lobby, everyone noticed something strange. Underneath the $10 suit, he was wearing a pair of scuffed, dirt-stained sneakers. Arthur Pendelton walked straight to kiosk 4. Clara looked up, her eyes widening. She recognized the face from the painting, yes, but she also recognized the eyes of Artie from the day before. Mr. Pendelton, she stammered, her face turning a ghostly shade of white. Arthur didn't look at the painting. He looked at her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp, slightly damp $50 bill. He laid it on her desk. I'm here to repay my debt, Clara, Arthur said. Sterling rushed over, his voice a frantic, high-pitched warble. Mr. Pendelton. Sir. I am so sorry for the misunderstanding yesterday. We had a vagrant, a man who looked remarkably like you, causing a scene. I had him removed immediately. I was protecting the brand. Arthur turned to Sterling. The look in his eyes was so cold it seemed to drop the room's temperature by 10 degrees. The man you removed wasn't a vagrant, Sterling. He was the owner. And the brand you were protecting is currently being rewritten in the cloud. As of 5 minutes ago, the CP1 system is dead. The empathy quotas are gone. The human interaction fee is abolished. Sterling blinked, his mouth hanging open. But the margins, the efficiency. The efficiency was a lie, Arthur said. He turned back to the entire branch, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. We built a bank that was too smart to be human. We forgot that the most valuable asset a man has isn't his credit score, it's his word and his need. From now on, if a man comes in here asking for $50 to buy medicine or a bus ticket, you don't ask the computer. You look him in the eye. If you think he's telling the truth, you give him the money. If you lose a few dollars to a liar, that's the cost of doing business as a human being. Arthur leaned over Clara's desk. You're not fired, Clara. But you are being promoted. You're the new head of the manual review division. Your only job is to override the computer whenever it forgets how to feel. Clara looked at the $50 bill, then at Arthur. A genuine, tearful smile broke across her face. Thank you, sir. Arthur turned to leave, but he stopped at the door. He looked at Marcus, the security guard. Marcus, Arthur said. The guard stood at attention, looking terrified. Sir. The ham this year. It won't be an automated delivery. I'll be dropping it off myself. And I want to meet Sarah and Maya. I hear they're doing great in school. Marcus's chest swelled. He nodded, a silent, respectful salute. Arthur stepped back out into the Chicago air. It was still cold, but the sun was finally winning. He climbed into the back of his car, where a small, threadbare rucksack sat on the Italian leather seat. Where to, Mr. Pendelton? The driver asked. Arthur looked at the rucksack. Inside was a half-eaten protein bar and a thermos of sugar water. Go to the park on Wacker Drive, Arthur said. I have a friend named Silas who's looking for a job as a chief human consultant. I think it's time he moved into the penthouse. As the car pulled away, the digital sign on the front of the bank flickered. The Compassion Protocol logo vanished, replaced by a simple, old-fashioned message in plain white text. Open for business. People welcome. Arthur Pendelton leaned back and closed his eyes. He was $50 poorer, and for the first time in his life, he felt like the richest man in the world.